The email from Dr. Elliot Wilson hit me like a physical blow, its words searing into my consciousness. "You've become a relic with a title we can't afford anymore." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, rereading the announcement that had been blasted to over 300 hospital employees. After careful consideration of our financial outlook, I've made the difficult decision to eliminate several administrative positions. This includes the role of Senior Hospital Administrator, currently held by Marissa Shaw. While we appreciate her 18 years of service, Northwood Memorial needs fresh perspectives to navigate today's healthcare challenges. Gina is stuck in the past, resistant to innovation, and preventing us from implementing necessary changes. I leaned back in my chair, the air sucked out of my lungs. Not only had he dismissed me in front of everyone I'd worked with for nearly 2 decades, but he'd misspelled my name, calling me Gina instead of Marissa. It was a small, spiteful error, but it stung like a personal insult, a final twist of the knife. The public humiliation was deliberate, a calculated move to erase my legacy. Dr. Wilson's unprofessionalism didn't surprise me, he'd shown his true colors long before this, but the audacity of it left me reeling. My name is Marissa Shaw. I'm 44 years old, and until that morning, I was the Senior Hospital Administrator at Northwood Memorial Hospital in Portland, Oregon. For 18 years, I had dedicated my life to this place, starting as an entry-level clerk with nothing but determination and a vision. I'd clawed my way up through budget cuts that slashed resources to the bone, staffing crises that left us scrambling, and 3 major leadership transitions that tested my resolve. Every step of the way, I'd fought to protect the patients and staff who made Northwood more than just a building. It was a lifeline, a sanctuary. But nothing, not a single moment in all those years, had prepared me for this betrayal. A knock at the door, a soft knock broke through the haze of my thoughts. Vanessa, my assistant, stood hesitantly in the doorway, her wide eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Marissa, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This is awful." He can," I cut in, forcing a deep breath to steady the storm raging inside me. As Chief Medical Director, he has the authority to restructure administration. I should have seen it coming. He canceled our last 3 meetings, 3 times he dodged me, and I let myself believe it was just scheduling conflicts. Vanessa's hands twisted together, her concern palpable. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked around my office, the space that had been my second home. Certificates lined the walls, testaments to years of hard-earned achievements. Family photos sat on my desk. My parents, my sister, reminders of the life I'd put on hold. And then there were the binders on my shelf, labeled safety protocols and violations. 18 years of meticulous documentation, every safety concern, every staffing shortage, every policy breach I'd fought to address. Some battles I'd won, many I hadn't. But those binders were my armor, my proof that I'd never stopped fighting for what mattered. "I'll be fine," I said, a strange calmness settling over me as I met Vanessa's gaze. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. I stood and began gathering my personal belongings, my photos, my coffee mug, a worn notebook filled with ideas for improving patient care. I left the binders where they were. I didn't need them in hand, I had digital copies of everything, safely stored where Wilson couldn't touch them. When security arrived to escort me out, a humiliating flourish straight from Wilson's playbook, I was ready. I smiled, not out of joy but defiance, and walked out of Northwood Memorial with my head held high, refusing to let him see me break. A mentor's voice that evening, I sat in my darkened living room, the silence pressing against me like a weight. A glass of wine trembled in my hand as I dialed a number I knew by heart. Dorothy Winters answered on the second ring. She'd been a board member at Northwood when I first started, my mentor through those early, uncertain years. Even after her retirement last year, she'd remained a confidant, a steady voice in the chaos. "He did what?" Dorothy's indignation crackled through the phone as I recounted the email. "That's grounds for a defamation suit, Marissa." "Maybe," I said, swirling the wine in my glass, watching the deep red catch the dim light. "But that's not the route I want to take." I poured out the story of the past 6 months, how Dr. Wilson had stormed into Northwood with grand promises of innovation and efficiency, his impressive resume dazzling the board. But beneath the polish, he was a wrecking ball. He'd eliminated free parking for staff within his first week, a petty move that sparked grumbling resentment. His second act was worse, slashing nursing coverage on night shifts, leaving patients vulnerable and staff exhausted. Over time, he'd chipped away at safety protocols, reducing nurse-to-patient ratios on the oncology and pediatric floors, extending surgical staff shifts beyond safe limits, stretching equipment maintenance schedules to save a few dollars. Each change was cloaked as a temporary fix or an industry trend, and the board, blinded by cost savings, ignored the ticking time bomb he was building. The problem is, he's clever, I said, my voice tight with frustration. He spins every cut as progress. The board doesn't see the risks, they just see the numbers. And I'm guessing you've documented all of this, Dorothy said, her tone sharp with certainty. Every incident, every complaint, every near miss, I confirmed. I've been building these files since I started at Northwood. 3 directors before Wilson tried cutting corners, and I always had the evidence to push back. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't bring myself to say, was how personal this felt. 20 years ago, my mother had been a patient at Northwood. A missed medication and an understaffed night shift had turned a routine procedure into weeks of complications. I could still see her face, pale and fragile, her trust in the system shattered. That memory had driven me to this career, to be the one who ensured those mistakes didn't happen again. It wasn't just a job, it was a promise. I sacrificed everything for that hospital, I said quietly, the words heavy with years of unspoken loss. Relationships had faded, the hope of a family slipped away, vacations became a distant dream. I believed I was making a difference. You were, Dorothy insisted, her voice fierce. And you still can. The question is, what do you want to happen now? I took a slow sip of wine, letting the question settle. I could walk away with a severance package and start over somewhere else. I could sue for wrongful termination, drag Wilson through the courts. I could retire early, as he'd no doubt intended. Or I could fight, not for myself, but for the patients and staff I'd sworn to protect. I want to save them, I said finally, my resolve hardening. The patients who deserve better, the staff who are breaking under his decisions. But I need to be strategic. Smart, Dorothy agreed. Wilson has the board's ear right now, but that can shift if the right evidence comes to light. I glanced at my laptop on the coffee table, its screen dark but brimming with potential. Years of files. Safety violations, staffing crises, policy breaches, sat waiting, undeniable proof that couldn't be dismissed as bitterness. Give me a few days, I said. I need to organize my thoughts, and my evidence. Building the case 3 days later, I sat at my dining room table, surrounded by a fortress of paper. Printouts of emails, policy documents, and incident reports sprawled across the surface, each one a shard of the truth I'd spent hours piecing together. My hands moved with purpose, sorting the most damning evidence of Wilson's reckless leadership. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my focus. A text from Jessica Palmer, the night shift charge nurse in the emergency department, lit up the screen. You wouldn't believe what happened last night. 2 nurses called out sick, and they weren't replaced. We were at dangerous levels all night. A patient with chest pain waited 4 hours to be seen. Wilson says it's the new normal and we need to adapt. I stared at the words, my heart sinking. That patient could have been anyone, someone's father, someone's child. I added Jessica's message to my file, another brick in the wall of proof. It wasn't just stories anymore, the statistics told a chilling tale. Since Wilson took over, incident reports had surged by 37%. Near misses, errors caught just before they harmed patients, were up 52%. The hospital was a powder keg, and he was striking matches. I picked up the phone and dialed Jessica. Jess, it's Marissa. I need your help. Her voice was tired but resolute. Anything, Marissa. This can't keep going on. Over the next week, I became a one-woman army. Jessica connected me with nurses who'd seen the decline firsthand, exhausted voices recounting missed medications, delayed treatments, and equipment failures. Vanessa, still at the hospital but disillusioned, slipped me internal memos that laid bare Wilson's contempt for safety. One email to the board, sent 2 months before my dismissal, stopped me cold. Marissa's obsession with outdated regulations is costing us millions. We need to modernize our approach to risk management. Modernize, I muttered, bitterness coating the word. He meant gamble with lives. I highlighted the line in my report, countering it with the truth. I wasn't clinging to rules, I was safeguarding people every night. As I sifted through the evidence, my mother's face haunted me. I'd made a promise to her, to myself, that no one else would suffer from negligence. That vow fueled me now, pushing me past exhaustion. The fight goes public after 2 weeks. My report was ready, a 50-page indictment of Wilson's tenure, backed by data, testimonies, and his own words. I met Dorothy and 2 former board members, Harold and Claire, at a quiet cafe, far from Northwood's reach. I spread the evidence before them, the spiking incident reports, the staffing shortages, the nurses' pleas. Their faces grew grimmer with every page. This is worse than I imagined, Dorothy said, her voice low. The board needs to see this. Wilson's got them wrapped around his finger, Harold warned. He's their golden boy. Then we go public, I said, my pulse quickening. Northwood's a public hospital. The community deserves to know. Dorothy nodded slowly. A whistleblower campaign. Risky, but it could work. Wilson will hit back hard. I know, I said. But I can't sit by while patients suffer. The next day, I contacted a journalist from the Portland Tribune, a woman known for tackling healthcare scandals. I handed her my report, watching her skepticism melt into shock as she read. This is explosive, she said. If it's true, it's a major story. It's true, I replied. And I've got the proof. The article hit the front page a week later. Former administrator alleges safety violations at Northwood Memorial. It laid out Wilson's cuts, the rise in errors, the staff's fears. The backlash was swift. Patients flooded the hospital with complaints, politicians demanded answers, and the board scrambled into an emergency meeting. Wilson fought back, calling me a vengeful ex-employee, threatening lawsuits. But the evidence held firm, and the public's outrage grew. The board, cornered, ordered an independent audit. Victory and reflection. The audit dragged on for 3 months, each day a test of patience. Wilson stepped down temporarily, his grip slipping. When the report finally dropped, it was a vindication. Safety violations, staffing failures, a culture of silence, all confirmed. It demanded immediate action. The board fired Wilson and offered me my job back. I turned it down. The battle had left me weary, and Northwood needed new blood. I recommended Vanessa, loyal, fierce, and ready to lead. She took the role and began the slow work of rebuilding. I stepped back, taking time to breathe, to think. The fight had cost me, but it had also proven something. One voice, armed with truth, could make a difference. Northwood started to recover, safety protocols returned, staff numbers rose, trust flickered back to life. And me? I found peace. I'd kept my promise, to my mother, to the patients, to the part of me that still believed in doing what's right, no matter the odds. The turnover rate had reached 42%, and now it had doubled. The numbers circled in my thoughts like vultures over a battlefield. I sat in silence, the edges of my reality fraying, when the doorbell rang, an abrupt jolt that snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. I opened the door to find Vanessa standing there, cradling a takeout bag with the care of someone carrying something far more important than food. I figured you weren't eating properly, she said, pushing past me into the kitchen. Her voice was light, but her eyes searched mine with concern. Also, I have updates. As she unpacked the fragrant containers of Thai food, the kitchen filled with warmth and the familiar spice of lemongrass and basil. But the comfort was fleeting. Wilson announced your replacement, she said, handing me a plate. Thomas Barton. He's from Chicago. No healthcare administration experience, but they're calling him a visionary in healthcare economics. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Translation: he knows how to cut costs, regardless of the consequences. Exactly, Vanessa said, settling across from me. They're implementing a new staffing model next week. Nurses will cover more patients. Support staff hours are being slashed. I stared at her, my appetite gone. Has anyone raised concerns? Catherine did. You know how she is, calm but direct. Wilson told her if she couldn't handle the workload, maybe she should consider other opportunities. Catherine Morris. Northwood's director of nursing for over 15 years. She was respected, tireless, and utterly devoted to patient safety. If even she was being pushed out. What's your plan? Vanessa asked, her tone careful. You've got that look, the one you get when you're plotting something. I hesitated. Vanessa was loyal. But involving her could jeopardize her job. I'm considering my options, I said. The board is convinced Wilson is saving the hospital from financial ruin. The most direct route would be taking evidence of unsafe practices to them. But he's covered his tracks well. What about the healthcare authority? She asked. An anonymous tip might trigger an investigation. I've thought about it. But regulators move slowly. Wilson's changes are already putting lives at risk. I need something faster. Stronger. Something that can't be ignored. I looked up at her. I'm thinking of a multi-pronged approach. Regulators, yes. But also the medical staff, patients, maybe even the media. Vanessa raised her eyebrows. Going nuclear, huh? Not yet, I said. But I'm preparing for all possibilities. What I couldn't say, was how angry I was. Not just for myself, or for losing my job. But because everything I had spent years building to protect patients was being dismantled by a man whose loyalty was to numbers, not people. In my mind's eye, I saw the binders in my office. The quiet record I had been keeping. Patterns of cuts, complaints, adverse outcomes. They hadn't mattered, until now. 1 week later, I found myself in a small cafe 3 blocks from Northwood Memorial, nursing a coffee that had long gone cold. Across from me sat Dr. Andrew Bennett, chief of surgery and someone I had trusted for over a decade. I shouldn't be meeting with you, he said in a low voice. Wilson made it clear, anyone keeping contact with you is undermining the new direction. Yet here you are, I said softly. Andrew sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Because what's happening isn't right, Marissa. The decisions he's making, they're reckless. Dangerous. Tell me, I said, pulling out a notebook. For the next 30 minutes, he detailed a litany of quiet disasters, surgical teams pulling double shifts, critical maintenance postponed, supply shortages so severe that nurses were buying their own gloves and disinfectants. And then, the discharge changes. They're pushing patients out the door before they're ready, Andrew said. We had 3 readmissions last week. One was an elderly woman, sent home with no medication instructions. She was back in the ER 12 hours later. Worse than before. Are these being documented? We're trying. But Wilson's new administrators, either they minimize the reports or they go missing. Catherine's keeping her own records, but she's hanging by a thread. I slid a USB drive across the table. This has templates for documenting unsafe conditions, formats that stand up to regulatory audits. Give it to Catherine. Andrew tucked the drive into his coat pocket. You're really doing this? I'm gathering evidence for the healthcare authority. But I need data. Real-time proof. I can't do it alone. He looked down at his hands. You know this could cost us everything. What about the patients? I asked. How many will suffer because we were too afraid to act? He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally looked up, there was resolve in his eyes. You're right. I'll help. But be careful. Wilson, he's not just some smooth-talking administrator. His brother-in-law is on the state hospital board. He's got connections. The words landed like stones in my stomach. If Wilson had allies in the very agencies that were meant to protect patients, my fight just got harder. As we stood to leave, Andrew gently touched my arm. There's something else. You need to know. Wilson's telling people you were fired for incompetence. That you mismanaged funds. That you falsified staffing records. He's painting you as the root of the hospital's problems. I froze. It felt like someone had knocked the air out of me. My face flushed with a wave of humiliation and rage. 18 years, of relentless work. Of putting patients first. Of mentoring, innovating, building trust. And now, it was all being rewritten into a lie. Thank you for telling me, I whispered, struggling to keep my voice steady. Walking back to my car, the rage simmered beneath my ribs. It wasn't just about the hospital anymore. This was personal. He wasn't just dismantling safety standards, he was tearing down my integrity. The gloves needed to come off. As I slid into the driver's seat and stared through the windshield, the answer came to me with the clarity of a bell. It was time to contact someone I had been avoiding. Someone who could amplify what was coming. James Lloyd. I stared at my phone screen, the reporter's name glowing in my contacts like a lifeline. James Lloyd, investigative journalist for the Portland Tribune, the one who'd called me years ago seeking comment on hospital administration issues. Back then I'd hesitated, now I tapped his number and sent a terse message, we should talk. I have information about patient safety risks at Northwood Memorial. Within minutes, his response arrived, been waiting for this call. We met the next day in Forest Park, far from the hospital's looming towers. The late morning sunlight filtered through the firs, birds chattering overhead, as though oblivious to our looming storm. James wore wire-rimmed glasses that gleamed when the light hit them, and his intense gaze made me both uneasy and oddly comforted. I've heard rumors, he began, folding a notepad on his lap. Staffing complaints, turnover rates, even whispers of safety incidents. But without someone on the inside, it's hard to verify. I exhaled, handing him a thick folder. These are redacted incident reports from the past 6 months. Look at the pattern. He flipped through pages, charts of missed equipment checks, notes of medication errors, logs of emergency readmissions. His brow furrowed deeper with every turn. They could argue these are isolated, he said at last, closing the folder. System-wide challenges, fluctuation in care, anything. I retrieved a second folder from my bag. I anticipated that. Here's statistical analysis comparing Northwood's safety metrics to peer hospitals over the past 2 years. Inside were graphs and tables showing a sharp decline at Northwood just as Wilson's cost-cutting measures took hold. While other hospitals held steady, our incident rates climbed. James whistled softly. You did your homework. 18 years of it, I corrected, voice tight. Previous administrators listened. Wilson fired me instead. He nodded slowly. Why go public now? Why not the board? I felt the old frustration flare. The board sees only dollars saved. They think I'm bitter, Wilson's painted me as incompetent. I need public pressure to force their hand. James leaned back, considering. Once the community knows, they won't be able to ignore it. Exactly. Relief rippled through me. He packed the folders carefully. I'll verify these with other staff quietly. Then we run. That evening, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Dorothy Wilson. My heart thudded. I steeled myself and answered. She's making moves, Dorothy said without greeting. Wilson's calling board members individually. He's telling them you plan to sue, for wrongful termination, and that you're fabricating safety concerns to bolster your case. I closed my eyes. That's not true. He's poisoning the well, she interrupted. And he's expediting every cost-cutting policy at once, support staff hours, maintenance cuts, discharge protocols. He's rushing these changes so they'll be irreversible before anyone can stop him. My hands trembled around the phone. What should I do? Stay the course, Dorothy advised quietly. But be prepared for backlash. He never admits mistakes, and he won't back down. After we hung up, I sank into the living room couch, the walls of evidence surrounding me like silent witnesses. My plan had been methodical: gather data, approach regulators, then go public. Now Wilson was accelerating the timeline, and perhaps silencing witnesses before they spoke. I texted James, "How quickly can you run the story?" 3 days later, the headline blazed across my newsfeed. Patient safety concerns plague Northwood Memorial Hospital. James's byline carried the weight of every documented case and statistical comparison. He'd verified my claims with other staff, secured internal emails, and even obtained snippets of the maintenance logs showing postponed equipment checks. Though I wasn't named, the article referenced recently terminated administrative staff who raised safety alarms. Almost immediately, my phone lit up. Catherine called first, her voice strained. "It's chaos here." Wilson convened an emergency meeting. He's furious, demanding names of everyone who talked to the press. He's threatening terminations. I pressed the phone to my ear, heart aching. Has he addressed any safety fixes? Not at all, she said, her frustration leaking through. It's all about controlling his narrative, finding traitors. Next was Andrew, measured yet relieved. The medical staff are quietly celebrating. Finally, someone said what we've all been thinking. Then James rang. "Turn on channel 4. Now." My hand shook as I grabbed the remote. On screen, Dr. Wilson stood behind a podium flanked by stiff-collared administrators. His expression was grave, polished, untouchable. "The allegations in this morning's Tribune are categorically false," he declared. His words echoed in my living room. Northwood Memorial maintains the highest standards of patient care. These fabricated concerns stem from a former employee terminated for incompetence, intent on damaging the hospital's reputation. He didn't name me, but his description, bitter, resistant to change, willing to harm the institution, was unmistakably me. My chest tightened. He had retained legal counsel and promised to pursue defamation charges. The screen shifted to an image of the hospital's facade, pristine in the midday light, an unspoken rebuttal to the chaos within. When the broadcast ended, silence pressed against me. My stomach churned. This was more than a battle for patient safety, it was a war for my reputation, my career, my very voice. In that moment, a hot determination replaced the shock. I would not be silenced by threats or spun narratives. The community deserved the truth, and I would ensure they heard it. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. New names, witnesses, listed there. More recordings, more documents waiting to be unveiled. The next steps would be even riskier, but the stakes had never been higher. I tapped a message to Catherine, "We escalate. We bring in the state authority. I need your full records." Then another to Andrew, "Prepare a signed affidavit from you and willing surgeons. We take this upstate." Finally, I drafted a note to James, "Hold for tomorrow morning. We're going national." As I set the phone down, the weight of the fight ahead settled on my shoulders. But beneath it was something else, a fierce hope. If lives could be saved, reputations restored, and justice served, then every risk would be worth it. I closed my eyes, braced for the storm, and whispered into the quiet room, "Let's finish this." My phone buzzed, and when I saw James Lloyd's name on the screen, I braced myself. "James, I've got Wilson running scared." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. "This is only the beginning. What happens next?" His voice was low, almost reverent. "The state healthcare authority called me this morning. They want to see all your documentation." My breath caught. Regulators moved glacially, yet here they were, propelled by the public outrage and the Tribune's expose. "I have copies ready," I said, heart pounding. "But what about Wilson's legal threats?" Intimidation tactics, James dismissed. We vetted every line. It's airtight. I wasn't so certain. Wilson had deep pockets and deeper connections. Even the clearest facts could be twisted. That afternoon, an anonymous email arrived in my inbox, from a Northwood address. Check oncology readmissions over the past 2 months. Premature discharges followed by complications. Wilson approved new protocols despite oncologist objections. My pulse surged. This was exactly the kind of concrete evidence that could break through any spin. I forwarded it to James, who promised to investigate. By evening, news vans lined Northwood's circular driveway. The local healthcare workers' union publicly backed the Tribune's investigation, and patient advocacy groups demanded an immediate review of safety protocols. Alone in my living room, I watched the live coverage on my muted TV. Relief and dread warred inside me. I'd set these events in motion, but I hadn't anticipated the speed or the intensity of the backlash. 3 days later, inspectors from the State Healthcare Authority arrived unannounced. Over 3 relentless days, they combed through records, interviewed staff, and observed every corner of the hospital. I stayed out of their way, relying on Catherine and Andrew for updates. They reported back with grim news. Staffing ratios had been pushed beyond safe limits, critical maintenance had been deferred, and discharge protocols were endangering vulnerable patients. Each finding was a vindication of my warnings. Yet Wilson himself was conspicuously absent, represented by jittery administrators unable to answer pointed questions. It was déjà vu. The man who'd once hired me had now engineered his own unraveling. On the 4th morning, a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Thomas Crawford, chair of the hospital board, clutching a leather folio and looking uncertain. Mr. Crawford, I said, surprise coloring my voice. May I come in? He asked, glancing down the street as if expecting enemies to materialize. Inside, my evidence wall still held binders and printouts, silent witnesses to the fight I'd waged. Crawford's eyes swept over them before he spoke. The board has received the preliminary findings from the State Healthcare Authority. Significant safety violations. Possible regulatory fines. He paused, then added in a lower tone, and financial irregularities, consulting fees paid to companies tied to Dr. Wilson's family, questionable equipment purchases from vendors where he holds interests. My stomach flipped. I'd been laser-focused on patient safety. I hadn't suspected the financial angle. Crawford closed his folio. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow. Dr. Wilson is on administrative leave pending a full review. We would like you to attend. My heart thudded. Reinstatement had never crossed my mind. I assumed my career at Northwood was irreparably over. Are you asking me to return? He nodded. We made a serious error in hiring Dr. Wilson and in letting you go. Your expertise and institutional knowledge are exactly what we need right now. The emergency board meeting. The conference room buzzed with tension. Half the board blamed me for stirring controversy. The other half acknowledged the grave missteps under Wilson's tenure. The empty chair beside the hospital's attorney spoke volumes about who wielded true power. When it was my turn, I rose, voice steady despite my racing heart. I presented. 1. Restoring safe ratios, reinstate nurse-to-patient ratios that had kept care exceptional for years. 2. Maintenance and supply protocols, resume regular checks and transparent ordering processes. 3. Checks and balances, implement an independent compliance committee with staff and patient advocates. These aren't radical ideas, I said. They're standard practices Northwood upheld for decades. Yes, they carry costs. But so do readmissions, complications, and regulatory fines, and most importantly, patient lives. The debate stretched for hours. Opponents argued that cost-cutting was essential. Supporters cited the sober findings of the authority. At last, the vote was called. Dr. Wilson's employment terminated effective immediately. My reinstatement, as senior hospital administrator, with expanded oversight of safety compliance. Independent audit, to review all policy changes from the past 6 months, reversing any that compromise patient care. A hush fell over the room as Crawford turned to me. Welcome back. That evening, the Tribune's website flashed another headline. Healthcare Authority confirms safety violations at Northwood, Director reinstated, Wilson ousted. The article wove together safety concerns and the newly uncovered financial irregularities. James's byline was there again, this time heralding not just an exposé, but a watershed moment for an entire community. I sat back in my chair, exhaustion and relief mingling in my chest. The storm had not yet passed, there would be audits to oversee, lawsuits to fend off, and the work of rebuilding trust to undertake. But for the first time in weeks, I felt the tide turning. Patients would be safer. Staff would be heard. And Northwood Memorial would have the chance to heal, just as I would. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet of my office, we did it. My professional reputation had been vindicated, but the path ahead was far from simple. Along with relief came the heavy awareness of the relationships that had been strained, the trust that had frayed, and the silence that had settled over too many hallways during those dark months. Rebuilding would take time. Healing even longer. Catherine met me in the hallway that first morning back. Her smile was cautious, but real. Welcome back, she said simply. There's a lot of work to do, I replied. Yes, she nodded. But this time, we'll do it right. That promise became our anchor. Together, we set to work. The hospital, once shrouded in fear and confusion, slowly began to find its rhythm again. One by one, the decisions that had threatened patient care were reversed. We reinstated appropriate nurse-to-patient ratios, resumed regular maintenance of critical equipment, and re-established support staff hours. Departments that had once operated under strain found breathing room again. Perhaps most important of all, we created a transparent, protected system for reporting safety concerns, one that bypassed the usual bureaucratic filters and reached directly to senior leadership. Every voice mattered. Every concern was documented, reviewed, and responded to. The final report from the Healthcare Authority landed like a thunderclap. 27 significant safety violations identified under Wilson's leadership. The fines were steep, just over $2 million, but the greater cost had always been human. Patients discharged too early. Surgeries postponed due to faulty equipment. Staff stretched to the breaking point. We couldn't undo the harm, but we could build forward from it. Wilson, now disgraced and under investigation for financial impropriety, left Portland quietly. Rumors circulated that he'd taken a position with a private healthcare consultancy in another state. It was a troubling development, but one beyond my reach. I had work to do here, real work, meaningful work. And I had a team willing to do it with me. What surprised me most in the months that followed was not how quickly the hospital recovered, but how much stronger it became. The adversity had stripped away complacency. We had looked failure in the eye, named it, and turned it into fuel for transformation. Every Friday morning, I began holding open forums, sessions where any staff member could speak freely. Some shared ideas for improvement. Others recounted moments when they had been afraid to speak. Slowly, the fear ebbed. In its place came ownership. 1 year to the day after what I had once considered my early retirement, I stood in the hospital lobby alongside Catherine, Andrew, and dozens of others who had helped carry Northwood through its darkest hours. The occasion was the launch of our new patient safety initiative, a sweeping, hospital-wide commitment to accountability and transparency. A glass wall in the lobby now displayed updated metrics for all to see. Infection rates, readmission rates, patient satisfaction scores. Not to shame, but to remind us that the numbers were more than statistics. They were lives. I looked out over the assembled staff, seasoned nurses, fresh recruits, janitors, surgeons, transport aides. Many had risked their jobs, their reputations, even friendships, to do what was right. My voice caught as I spoke. This place doesn't stand because of any one administrator, I said. It stands because good people refused to let it fall. They applauded quietly, a collective acknowledgement of a shared burden, and a shared triumph. Later, I found a quiet corner and took a breath. The wall of evidence I had once assembled in desperation now lived only in sealed archives. Its purpose had been served. Reform, not revenge, had been the outcome. And perhaps that was the truest form of justice. Northwood had become more than a hospital again. It had become a place of healing, inside and out.